This is an interview with Dr. Calvin Bowers, Los Angeles, California. It'll be conducted primarily by his wife, Mrs. Barbara Bowers. And Dr. Bowers, we just wanted to really find out more about you, the man. We all know you, the public person. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to find out who Dr. Calvin Bowers, the man, is behind the scenes. So where were you born? How did you get started? And the whole 9 yards.
Well, I was born in West Tennessee, in a little city of about 5,000 in Selmer, S-E-L-M-E-R, Selmer, Tennessee. It was probably just an average southern city, but I was born to parents Henry Bowers and Ollie Bowers, who had 9 children, and I was number 8. It seemed like 8 might have been my favorite number, or it had been my, I was number 8. I believe I weighed 8 pounds. I was born on the 8th of April. So I'm associated with that number. But we went to school, all went to school together. My father was a farmer, but primarily he liked to be a carpenter. And he did some carpentry work, and some very, very fine work. My mother was a homemaker. She worked in the field with the children, and of course she worked in the home. We had 5 girls and 4 boys. I went to McNair County High School, a black school at that time, all black, for 12 years before leaving. And early on, I think when I was in school, I think I learned by having kind of a one-room school, even though we had other departments on the campus. But I learned because we were in the 2nd, 3rd grade all together. And I heard other grades reciting and saw the teachers and interacting. So the time I got to those lessons, I learned. I must have had, some native ability in order to learn, in order to want to learn. So all the way in my schooling, the teachers gave me a lot of encouragement. And I was in plays and a lot of different things, but they gave me a lot of encouragement. It gave me confidence, which I really needed later in life. And that's why I always give children confidence. I was at that school 12 years, in that school 12 years, and I began preaching at the age of 14. There were a number of factors that went into that. And the principal, I was very impressed with the principal, Professor Ledbetter. He gave me the privilege of giving the baccalaureate address, and that was that spread around in that little community. And that pretty much summarized my early years.
How did you come about being a minister at 14? Were you like a child prodigy, or?
I don't think of myself as that. Well, my mother was very religious, and she wanted us to go to Sunday school. In fact, Major was one of my first teachers. Oh. He taught the card class. Really? And I guess I could answer questions in Sunday school, and our family liked to study the Bible. My older sister had a book, 4,000 questions on the Bible, and whatever kind of knowledge you achieve, you can build on that. And I started at 14, but I was already in church.
You know, you have, what I admire about you is the way that you can memorize things. Do you happen to have a poem that you could quote right-handed?
Yeah, poems have been very helpful to me. One of the poems was to give to the world the best you have, and the best will come back to you. And that kind of influenced my life. Another poem that influenced my life later which I am just one. But I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And what I can do, I ought to do. And what I ought to do, I will do. And then I like the poem by Russell, you know, truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. And the scaffold sways the future, and beyond the dim unknown, God standing in the shadows, keep his watch above his own. It's those kind of poems, and then biblical verses that made you, and a lot of sayings by your mother, sayings by your daddy. I remember my mother would say, well, you know, you laying a foundation for a man. And therefore, that idea of a foundation was in me. And we talked a lot about that when that connected with the biblical idea of foundation. Either hear these sayings or mine do them. So yeah, I like poems, and I like stories, and I like Aesop's fables, Uncle Remus, and all those stories. I like those.
And how old are you?
Well, at this time, I was born April the 4th. I was born April 8th, 1932. So at this time, I'm 78 years old. Yeah.
That's what I wanted you to point out. Is how sharp you are at your age. You told me once, if we ever, you said, but when I lose it, you're going to have to take care of me.
Well, you change as you get older. You change as you get older. But I think that activities serve as a stimulant.
One question I'd like to ask you is, how did you wind up in California?
Well, it wasn't a well-laid plan, I'll tell you that. Racism has been a part of all of our lives if you lived in the South. Fortunately, we had a man, James Custer Taylor. He was a superintendent of schools, and he was a member of the Church of Christ. And he became very fond of me. You know, he knew that. And he said, I want to make sure I'd like to see you go to Freed-Hardeman, now Freed-Hardeman University, which was only 20 miles away. He wrote a letter in my high school year trying to get me into Freed-Hardeman. But they wrote me a letter saying, you know, as of now, no provisions are being made for colored to go to school, and added insult to it by saying that we recommend you to go to NCI, Nashville Christian Institute, which was a high school. So, not being able to go to school, I didn't know a lot about college. And you know, it would have been so easy if they'd have said, we welcome you with open arms, because I didn't have a dime. I might have found some way to go, but I didn't have any money. But if they said, come on, we welcome you. But they didn't. And incidentally, after I discovered that there was really no work around Selma that I could do, I was preaching in a little town named Guys, Tennessee, and Raymer, Tennessee. There were just little areas there. But after I graduated from high school, there really was no work. But we were pretty much sheltered from the white. We only met white folk. We only met in certain contexts. We met working in the field together. We did socialize. We might have gone to the movies and saw each other there, or in work areas. But we didn't really interact a whole lot, even in the church. So, but I went to Decatur and lived there, and it's just coincidental that I learned there was a school there. My sister told me, so I went out. And they accepted me into the school, and I went, and that was a new experience in integration. That was a new challenge. And really, it pointed up the weaknesses of my previous education. I was at the top, at the all-black school, pretty near the bottom when I got to Millikan University. And really, the first year, I was on probation, 1.6 GPA. But I went back the next year and I went in a Bible class and scored 91 on a test. And I said, well, you know, maybe I do belong. But I never was an outstanding student in that I had to do so many things just to stay in school. I had to work a couple of jobs and then work in a foundry to stay in school, and also preach alternate Sundays in Decatur and Champaign. So then you ask how I got to California, because I wanted to go to a school associated with Churches of Christ. And at that time, Pepperdine was the only school I could go to. So I didn't receive a lot of encouragement to go to Pepperdine. I graduated in 4 years, from 51 to 55, and I didn't receive a lot of encouragement because on the work side, people were telling me, you have a good job in the foundry. I was making almost $100 a week in the foundry. That was good back then. And then they said, well, if you want to be a preacher, you can't do any more preaching than you are right now, but preach the gospel. So I wasn't encouraged, and naturally your parents, that, you know, California was unimaginable to them. We didn't have some relatives to go to. I just had to go. But I wanted to do it. I wanted to do it, and they accepted me as an unclassified student. But when I got here in September of '55, I started, and I took 9 graduate units the first time. Did very well on that, and I continue to do very well. That's how I got to California. Route 66. All the way from Oklahoma City.
You had a funny story about Route 66. Somebody was following you or something?
Yeah. Well, as I traveled through Mexico, you know, mostly all I had seen is black and white. Black and white people, maybe a rare Asian or a rare Latino in school, and that was very rare. So I passed, and I was alone in a little 53 210 Chevrolet, black. And I passed these young men in a car, and I know, like, they had their shirts off, and they seemed to have fun. And then after I passed them, I looked back, they were trailing me. So I speeded up, and they speeded up. I speeded up more, and they speeded up more. And finally, you know, I was just exceeding the limit by such an amount. They pulled around beside me, and they were young Latinos or Native Americans with no shirts on, you know, and they were having fun, and one leaned out as far as he could and yelled, "You're about to lose your license plate." I thought my life might end right there on Route 66. But I calmed down and made it. Yeah, made it from there. That's the.
What do you remember about coming to California? What were your first impressions? What did you see first? What did you think? Were you afraid?
Well, I was impressed when I realized that there were orange trees. But I just kept seeing all these orange trees beside the road. And then when I first got here, there was something we had in those early years called smog. There was an unusual smell in the air. Smog, a combination of fog and smoke. But they have changed the car so much, they've reduced the smog quite a bit. So that unique smell. And then another thing that interested me was outdoor eating places. I never lived in Illinois 4 years, and in Tennessee, I never witnessed a place where people eating outdoors. You know, you could walk up to a stand. But I liked all of that, and I liked the idea that it was so diverse, and everybody was from somewhere else. So I had a feeling of, you know, frontier, kind of a little frontier, but because people had come here. And that's what I remembered, you know, and of course the weather. I thought it was a joke in the September and fall that people wearing fur around their necks. I said, well, they need with fur. And then those are the things that I found to be fascinating.
What was it like when you first got to school? Did they welcome you with open arms? Did you get a lot of help? Were you lost and lonely?
No. Mr. Professor, I remember him writing me a letter and welcoming me to the local church. Hubert, I think that's his name. But he was a Spanish teacher and he was in charge of tennis program. He taught tennis. And then I remember Dr. Cannon, when I registered for a class in the library, he said, "I'll be glad to have you in there, Cal." He didn't know me, but he just said, "I'll be glad to have you." I accepted that, and while I was registering, I met this man. He looked like somebody I knew. And I discovered that he came from Henderson, Tennessee, which is 19 miles. But he had been away. He'd been in the military, and he finished at Fisk and decided he wanted to go back to Pepperdine, go to school to be a minister. So he had come to Pepperdine about 6 months. And Brother Joe Brasher. And I found out that he was a relative to my wife. And here again, I think it was a providence of God. But we became fast friends because we were in the same classes. And he had a better car than I. And he said, "I'm going to this little church over West Adams. That's the West Adams Church of Christ." So I went over there, and I found a lot of folk from Tennessee who actually knew, in Nashville, knew my sister's a black family. So I felt at home, quite at home over there. And a year later, I got married. So it was a good year. I didn't have any money. I started working for $35 a week. Type paper product. That was a Jewish man down on Slaughter. And I learned the city because he would draw streets, and I would take things there. He dealt with paper products, humorous napkins, and little toys for parties, things like that. So that's kind of what it was like that first year.
Were the studies hard for you? Was it difficult?
No, the studies were relatively easy. They were relatively easy. Well, it was what I wanted to study. It was the Bible. And I had the same teachers for several courses. But now I had not been in higher education where I had teachers who were members of the Church of Christ. And I felt a closeness to them. We had Dr. Campbell, we had Mr. Nagai, who was Japanese, was also Hebrew teacher. He taught me Christian thought. And Dr. Campbell, R.C. Campbell, taught Cannon, not Campbell. Cannon taught me the epistles. But one teacher there, I felt a little bad for him. He was my master professor, major professor for my master studies. But I saw that he wasn't prejudiced. He was just hard on everybody. Not hard, but outspoken. I remember, after my first semester, they wiped away all that unclassified, and they said, "Well, you're a graduate. You can do graduate work. We see that." And I ended up like about 3.7 out of a possible 4 points. I just felt so good to be in that environment, and it was relatively easy.
Was it your intention to go to graduate school from the beginning? Is that like a goal, a plan that you set for yourself?
I came to go to graduate school. See, I had graduated from Milligan with a BA degree in philosophy and psychology. Don't ask me why I took that. I really wanted to study religion, and I studied a lot of religion. That's what I took. At Milligan University, I took Greek, and then other courses in philosophy and psychology. And that ended up being my major. But, I appreciate myself in one way because I valued learning to think more than trying to get a job. It would seem logical that a black youth going to college would want to study something that would get him a job. but you try getting a job with a degree in philosophy and psychology. It's not likely. So when I came to California, I started as a graduate student. I started in the graduate program, and I did finished. It took me I finished my work relatively soon, but it took me a while to write that thesis and to select a subject. So I finally wrote the thesis on leadership development in black churches of Christ. Of course, we were Negro then.
Now, how long have you been at the Figueroa Church of Christ?
You know, I started Figueroa Church of Christ January of 1957.
Oh, okay.
I went away 2 years to serve as academic dean at Southwestern Christian College, 67 through 69. And when I returned, there was an opening at Pepperdine, so I started working there and continued at Figueroa Church of Christ. 54 years.
Okay.
When did you become head minister at Figueroa?
Well, I only became the quote-unquote lead minister in the 90s. But the minister, I worked with the minister there, Brother Hogan, who started that congregation. I worked with him for 40 years. But he earlier than the 90s, he had a heart attack. But I really, working in Pepperdine, I really didn't see a need to push the issue of becoming the minister. And I told him, even though he had suffered a heart attack, that as long as you want to be minister, that's fine with me. But I don't intend to do that with anybody else. So while he was ill, you know, recovering from his heart attack, and he got something ill, but I didn't push, you know, becoming it. Finally, when it was pretty obvious that he wasn't going to live, I told the brothers that, you know, I think it's time, and we went out and they you know, then they asked me to serve.
And from the time you got your master's, how many masters do you have? You have one master's or?
2. I got a master's in religious education, and then when I returned, tuition was free. They didn't pay the teacher a whole lot. Any tuition for members of my family was also free. So I started to work on another master's, and I earned a master's in communication. And that really was the most practical master's, because most of my teaching was in communication and speech. And that's
At that time, did you have any inclination that you would go for a doctorate one day? Any desire? Now, what year was this?
I started on my doctorate. I started on my doctorate about 76. No, but being in a educational environment, you will think about, you know, that you could see the need of the doctorate. When I came to Pepperdine, they were happy to have me because there was a lot of racial tension. And they said, we're happy to have you. And they were glad, the president and all of them. But as that came to calm down, then they started pushing the academics again, that we need to have a doctorate. In fact, that was necessary for certain promotions that I desired, to have a doctorate.
When did you get your doctorate? Right there at Pepperdine?
1981.
From Pepperdine?
No, from from Southern USC. University of Southern California.
Was that difficult to attain?
Pretty difficult. It was mostly difficult getting in, because they went back to my undergrad grades and saw that I had about a 2.2. They didn't take into consideration my grad work at Pepperdine, which was about 3.4, 3.7, or something like that. Almost all A's. But the work at USC was pretty challenging, especially as you move from different levels. First of all, they only let me take one course, and I did well in that course, so I could take more courses. and you reach a point where you get the admissions exam. Goes on exam several days to see whether you can be admitted to the program. When we pass that, then you have to go all your studies, and then you have what you call a qualifying exam, the quals. You spend about 3 days on that, and if you pass that exam, then you became a candidate. And that would be you were able to write your dissertation. And when that was approved, you know, then you qualified for the degree.
What did you write your dissertation on?
I wrote my dissertation on the selection of academic personnel at 6 colleges and universities. Now, about that meant, you know, you have the academic dean, or you have the dean of well, the academic dean that works, you know, with all the curriculum. So that person, or academic vice president, I wanted to see how many minorities and how many blacks, and how did they go about selecting them. So I was able to use the 6 universities to find out how they go about selecting them and retaining blacks. So that's what it was on.
You had a question, Mrs. Bowers?
Yes. How did you were working 2 jobs when you were getting your doctorate, weren't you?
Yes, beginning about 76, 70, yeah. I worked full-time at Pepperdine, carried a full load there, and also I worked at the church.
Right.
Many times, you know, I would leave Pepperdine at 3 o'clock, come to USC and study till 10 o'clock. Many times I would preach a service morning and night at the church, then come home and grade papers or write a paper far into the night. So yeah, it was well worth it though. Well worth it.
Well, you have really done a great job. And what is your future plans? What are you going to do?
Well, my goal in life, my aim in life was to be a Christian man. That's all I want to be. I want to be a man, and all that implies. You know, nobody's boy, but just a man. And I want to be a Christian, and all that implies, to be a Christian man. And future, I'm not just whatever comes my way. I would like to be able to put down some thoughts and some things that I've learned that might be helpful to those coming on. And I would like to do some lighter writing, you know, just writing like, writing like, you know, I don't ever anticipate writing a novel, but just a biography and writing about a black family, motif of a black family, and maybe some materials that would help the church. Other than most of my colleagues are writing sermon books, and they go around and preach, and they sell those sermon books. But I'd like to write things like biography, literature study guides, you know, for studying different things. So more than that, you know, I like to do that.
You have one book published at the present, right?
Yes, in 1998. Yeah, I published a book called Realizing the California Dream. It chronicles the history of the Black Church of Christ in the city of LA, beginning with the first preacher who preached in the city, first black preacher in 1902, and all the way down through 1998, really to year 2000, and it tells about that, tells about outstanding individuals And it built around the motif of a dream which drew people to Los Angeles.
In closing, is there anything you'd like to add to what you've already expounded upon?
Well, this may sound negative, but I live with a great deal of pain. And the pain is what I see, happening, especially to black people. And seeing that we've made lots of changes, but we still have a long ways to go. And I realize that racism is a reality in most of our institutions. Subtle racism, institutional racism, just overt racism, and how that impacts people physically and mentally. So I realize that that's a problem. We want to, do whatever we can to try to improve relationships in those particular areas.
And we'll wrap it up.
Yeah.